Hello and welcome to a new episode on the Wars Rebellion podcast. And as you can see, if you're watching the video version, I am again joined by my partner on this trifold adventure, Andrew Houck down in Portier. And I'm your host, Niels Eichhorn. We are already deep in a conversation about history, commemoration, memory, historic sites, and it's time that we start our recording. And joining us, as sort of promised a few weeks ago when we released the first video, we're joined again by Scott Hancock from Gettysburg College. He is an associate professor there. And like we said last time, we're kind of looking forward to hearing what he kind of saw during the reenactment, the commemorations at the anniversary in early July. So, yeah, we're looking forward to this conversation. So, and Scott just told us, and I guess this will be the perfect segue into our conversation tonight, that he is about to go to the battlefield and take some pictures of markers that could be disappearing potentially. So thank you so much again for joining us, Scott, and bearing with the German and the Frenchman.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Yeah. And always it's great talking with you all last time. Yeah. And so I can explain briefly about those signs, uh, which relates to all of this that we're going to talk about. And so yeah, as you both probably know, and a lot of your listeners probably know, there is a order from the Secretary of Interior at the end of May to where they put QR codes National Park Service signs, not just at battlefield sites, but at any national park in the United States that's owned by the federal government, operated by the federal government. And so the QR codes were encouraging people to use the QR code to report anything that they thought was negative about American history. And the language, I should have I could probably find that quickly, the exact language of it. And there's different sections of the order that he sent out, the Secretary of Interior, and the first several are problematic, but they are more about asking people to report things that they think are inappropriate, which you can interpret that in a variety of ways. But the last section of it specifically says anything that people think are negative is negative about American history or America in general or the parks or whatever it may be. So you can interpret that as well as slavery negative. So if you have something about slavery, is that negative? I mean, I don't think slavery is a positive thing. So I don't know if that's what the Secretary of Interior intended. But the result of that was that most of the information they got as a result from the QR code was positive. Well, and I know this from talking to some park rangers. They said that well over 90% of the response was people saying, "Oh, we think what the parks are doing is great. Keep it up. If anything, we want more of this stuff."
Hmm.
And so I don't know if that's why there was another order from, I think this time the White House, not just the Secretary of Interior, but you'd have to fact check me on that. Um, and so this one was sent out about a week and a half ago, and it is telling federal employees, so national park employees, to do this, to to report signage or anything else that is negative. And so I am speculating here, but what I wonder is if the first Secretary of Interior order at the end of May, which was just for the public in general, if they didn't get the response that they wanted because it was so positive. Whereas the order that came out a week and a half ago, they can force employees to do this, right? So I'm speculating, but I'm wondering what was going on behind the scenes is because they didn't get what they wanted. So now they decided to use the leverage they have over federal employees. And so part of the result of that has been park rangers and others sending in signs and basically asking questions, saying things like, well, if a sign in a national park talks about slavery, asking, is this negative?
Mm,
Um, so I think from and this is my opinion, it's only anecdotal, but in my anecdotal experience, I think most park rangers probably don't want to do this.
mm,
So I interpret they're reporting these things in that kind of format, saying, well, is this negative? Is sort of to me, it almost seems like a reluctant
mm.
compliance, but I don't know. I have to speculate a bit. Um, so anyway, there is a website called Save Our Signs that I have up here on my screen. And this what they're asking people to do for Save Our Signs is take pictures at any national park. It could be Yellowstone, could be Gettysburg National Military Park, whatever, of any signs that they think might be under threat of disappearing, and to upload them to the website so that there's a public record. So a couple of gentlemen from Chicago who happen to be in town this afternoon, that I've done a battlefield tours before with. They teach at a great place called De La Salle Institute of High School. So the two of them and I are going to go around the battlefield later this afternoon and get pictures, and hopefully other people already have, but we just want to make sure. So we're going to get pictures of signs, because there are at least five, and I think six that have been put up on the battlefield since 2021. 2021, I might have mentioned this last time I was on with you all,
Mm.
was the first sign on the battlefield that mentions anything about slavery, race, or African American. So the first sign
Hmm.
in 160 plus years. Well, the battlefield hasn't been a park for that long, but first sign since the battle to mention anything about those things. And I believe now, I know there's at least five, depending on how you interpret it, five and a half, six, one kind of alludes to it. So we're going to get pictures of all those, upload them to the website. So,
Yeah, I actually, this is something interesting. Maybe you know, since you have close ties to the Park Service, because I remember I was with a student group a few years ago at Cowpens in South Carolina at the National Battlefield Park there, and the park rangers there was sort of like had a sign, and he was talking about how there were like errors on that sign, like inconsistency with interpretation that we know better today than we did, well, I guess at this stage 50 years ago when the park was created. And he kind of was like, even though we know there's problems with it, we're not going to remove it because it's part of the park's history. So it's sort of like, what is the NPS's policy with regard to like removing markers from the park? Because I was always under the understanding that once these things are up, they're maintaining them, but they're not usually removing them.
well, so my understanding is that, things like monuments, of course,
Mm,
it takes an act of Congress, has to be passed by the House and the Representatives and the Senate for a monument to be installed or removed or altered.
mhm.
Um, and then there's
At
other,
a,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
you, sorry, for monuments at a national park.
Yeah, on
Mhm.
any national park, anything that's federal land, yeah,
Okay.
literally takes an act of Congress. So Gettysburg says there are over 1,300 monuments, markers, and memorials or tablets. So some of those, so we've got monuments, lots of monuments, lots and lots of monuments. But then there are also these other, they're big stone, I don't know how you describe them. It's like a stone tablet. They're probably about 5 to 6 feet tall, maybe 4 feet wide and a foot thick. And they have a bronze plate on them that just has information about like what happened at that site, what regiments or generals were there, and what happened on the first day or second and third
And
day.
and those are the ones that have the battle lines that indicate the
The,
battle lines.
the battle lines.
Like
Yeah,
the troop
where
lines,
where
or the
where, yeah, where the regiments were lined up.
Yeah, well,
according to.
they don't have a visual depiction of those, but it has
No, no,
just
no. They just has like, this company of this regiment was here at this spot on at this time on July
right.
2nd. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So there are the stone ones like that, and then there's other um, markers that are a different style. So there are, hundreds and hundreds of those. Um, I don't know if those fall under the same legal requirements as monuments, if those can be altered or removed or changed. But the signs I'm talking about, they're sometimes called wayside markers. They're
Hmm.
little, they're about 4 feet high. They're kind of set on a diagonal so
Hmm.
that if somebody has a disability, physically challenged, it's like in a wheelchair, they can still come up to it and read it. And the Park Service can change whenever they want without any kind of act of Congress, without any federal
Hmm.
legislation. So those interpretive signs are the ones that we're going to take pictures of. And those are the ones that if somebody reports it and says, well, this says, this has something about slavery or race, we think this is negative.
Hmm.
And if somebody further up in the Department of the Interior decides, well, that's got to go, then they could change that because they're held by metal brackets. So all you have to do is slide the sign out of the metal
Hmm.
brackets and slide a new sign in. Um, so they're not as permanent as all the other stone tablets and monuments and things like that.
So they're similar to the Civil War trails monuments or interpretive signs, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
you
That's
probably have seen them. It's like metal pieces that kind of stick out, and then you have
Yeah,
yeah,
like
right, right.
sometimes
yep,
like it's a background picture with text or like a
Sometimes there's a
literal
map.
background, yeah, a map on it.
Hmm.
Like I think like when I did the Macon books, they talked about like they have like a template where the park could can create it themselves and like just put pictures and text and have it locally printed, or you could go through Harper's Ferry and get it
Hmm.
done. Hmm. That's
yeah,
the more
yeah.
official stuff.
Now it does take a while for these things to get done. And as I've learned, again, I can't remember if I mentioned this last time. So there's a sign on the top of one of the observation towers, the tallest one in the battlefield. It's on West Confederate Ave. It overlooks Pickett's Charge. A lot of people call it the Longstreet Tower. One of the park rangers a few years ago said it's on the land of James Warfield, the African American farmer. It doesn't have any official name, so he was going to call it the Warfield Tower. That was his campaign, his one-man campaign. So I said, "Well, I'll join you in that campaign." So we call it the Warfield Tower. It is called Warfield Ridge that it's on, but the sign that's at the top of that mentions escaping slaves, freedom seekers. And I've not taken all the credit by any stretch because a lot of people involved in all this kind of stuff. But I had mentioned to one of the Rangers in 2008, hey, well, you should put a sign up on that tower that talks about, escaping slaves because they're integral to why we had a civil war and thus a battle at Gettysburg. And we know that they used the mountains west of the battlefield to head north. So it's connected to what visitors can see from that tower. And uh, in 2020, one of the chief rangers here showed me a mock-up of the sign to go on that tower. And in 2024, it went up. So even from the time they actually had a mock-up to the time the sign was actually installed was 4 years. And I think it's really important to emphasize that's not because I think the Rangers or other people are dragging their feet. As I've learned, it's just federal bureaucracy. It just takes a
Hmm.
long time, all the levels that it has to go through to get approved, and then funding, and then make it, install it, all that stuff. Uh,
So
the
16 years
Rangers tell me frequently the wheels of federal bureaucracy turn slowly, and so I have learned that is very true.
so from 2008 when you mentioned it to 2024. That's a long time.
Yeah, well, it took from 2008 to 2020 to actually, because I think part of it is the Park Service, understandably, and when I mentioned this 2008, well, one, they said, well, it was the economic meltdown, the financial crisis. So they had no money, and each sign takes a couple $1,000s. And they really were they had nothing. So some, after a period of where they recovered from that, but then the process they had to go through is figuring out, well, what stories do we tell? Because for a long time, and I'm sure you know this, the Park Service were committed to telling only the stories of the battlefield. So like Gettysburg, the stories that happened in the 3 days of the battle. Maybe the day leading up to it and the retreat on the day after. Uh, and so their response was, well, if we tell the story of escaping slaves, even just on one sign, how many other stories? There are thousands of them, which is a legitimate question to ask, right? I mean, we deal with that all the time as historians. You can't, even what we tell our students, you can't use all the things that you find. You have to make choices. So I don't know what the process was between 2008 and 2020 when they actually showed me the mock-up of the sign. And as I said, there are other people involved. So they're talking to Pete Carmichael was, part of this kind of stuff, and Jill Titus at Gettysburg Civil War Institute. So, it's not just me by any stretch.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's a it's a painfully slow process to some of us on the outside who just want to see things change. But
Yeah. So what role does the Gettysburg Foundation play?
yeah, so the Gettysburg Foundation, they're not owned by the federal government. They're separate. They do fundraising, but they have an agreement with Gettysburg National Military Park, and I don't know how all the intricacies of that relationship. So Gettysburg Foundation owns the property that the museum is on, the Visitor Center Museum. That's kind of in the center of the 6,500 acres that constitutes Gettysburg National Military Park, and actually, the foundation, I was talking to the foundation head a few years ago. He said if they wanted to put a monument up on the foundation land to anything, they could raise money and do it tomorrow. They don't need federal approval for that. But anything outside that land, you need federal approval for if you're going to erect a monument or remove a monument. So,
Well,
So
that
did
I
they?
think we can use that as a
Sorry.
segue into like the other organizations a little bit of like so Gettysburg Foundation, but how how's the relationship between Civil War Institute and Gettysburg Military Park?
uh, in the past, I think it's been pretty good. And so, for those of your listeners who don't know, so Gettysburg College has a Civil War Institute, which is not a academic department. It's not, they don't teach classes or anything like that, but the college owns and operates a Civil War Institute. So that's what Pete Carmichael was the director of. Um, and they have a summer week-long institute where people come from around the country, and they have, like, anybody can go to that. You pay, and they invite different historians and rangers and others to come do panels and talks and battlefield tours here and other places like Antietam. Um, but yeah, the college supports that well. It's the relationship between CWI, Civil War Institute, and Gettysburg National Military Park in the past has been a very cooperative one, and I expect it will be going forward.
And I mean, it's like it, excuse me, it seems very symbiotic in that there's a lot of interns that are being placed and that sort of like I mean, the publicity that the Institute brings with thousands of attendees is huge.
Yeah, their interest. It's in the interest of each to work with the other.
Hmm.
Hmm.
We'll ask afterwards who the new director is.
Okay, all right.
But it seems a very cynical relationship then. Um,
Ooh,
once on, no, I mean
I like go 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 go.
the symbiotic. Yeah, it's kind of a win-win, but um, the three main groups then are getting out of it what they want. I don't know
Yeah,
how to.
and there's also Gettysburg Destinations. So Gettysburg Destination markets the town of Gettysburg, tourism.
Oh,
So they're not, the Gettysburg Foundation is specifically connected and tied to Gettysburg National Military Park.
Mm,
Like if Gettysburg National Military Park didn't exist, the foundation wouldn't exist.
mm,
Okay.
Gettysburg and the Civil War Institute, it would exist even if Gettysburg National Military Park didn't exist, although, there would be far less interest in the Civil War Institute at Gettysburg. So
mm,
Gettysburg Destinations, though, is a broader organization. They obviously are uh, encouraged and interested in the success of these other institutions because they bring people into town, right? They bring people here. But Gettysburg Destination is broader. And so I was talking a couple of weeks ago with a graduate student, an archaeologist who's doing his PhD dissertation on marketing in Gettysburg and consumer material culture of Gettysburg over the last several decades, which was informational for me because I always have this impression, this narrow-minded impression, or archaeology is really old stuff, but he's
mm,
very interested in what's going on last few decades. And so what he was telling me, and it makes sense to my experience living here for the last 24 years, that Gettysburg Destination and others around the early 2000s, about when I moved here, they wanted to broaden and shift somewhat the focus of what brings people to Gettysburg because they recognized that Civil War tourism was declining, which Gettysburg still gets about it's 7,500 people, still close to 1 million people a year come here. So it's a lot of people coming to a small town. But it used to be more, 50 years ago, it was more than that. And probably the percentage of that million or so people who come to Gettysburg now, they're not all coming to visit the battlefield like, 30 or 40 years ago, probably 95% or more of them. That's why they came here. So there's I think USA Today and a couple other publications like that over the last 3 or 4 years, like one of them named Gettysburg one of America's 25 most romantic towns to visit, which is odd, right?
Romantic.
Yeah, you're laughing. So it's odd, right? Because it's romantic because 160,000 soldiers tried to kill each other over 3 days, because there were 51,000 casualties, over 70,000 soldiers dead and lying in the battlefield and rotting in the sun and the rain, 80,000 horses here. I don't know how many of them died. And as I'm told, horses produce 30 pounds of manure a day and how much urine. So, the devastation to the battlefield here, the environmental devastation, the smell, the trauma to the soldiers and the townspeople was generational. But it's one of the most romantic towns to visit. And I'm not saying that in a disparaging way or like I'm making fun of who named it that, because it is a quaint town. I have friends sometimes who come visit here, like a friend of mine who lives about 45 minutes away came down to have lunch with me about a month ago. And he said, man, my wife and I have to come here more often. And he wasn't talking about the history. He said, you have so many like cool little cafes and nice places to eat. It's such a pleasant town to walk around. And it is, it's a very kind of
the downtown
town.
is great.
Yeah.
I mean, the downtown is really nice. I mean, you've got great shops. Yeah.
And there are more when I first came here, there were fewer of those like places to eat and stuff like that. There are more. One of the soccer players I used to coach just opened up a restaurant in town that's great, right in the downtown area, just off the center square. There's a lot of boutiques. And as this archaeologist mentioned to me, I never really thought about it. Most of the stores that aren't food related market to women. Women aren't the primary group who come to do the military history. So that's why I say, and I've mentioned all this, so Gettysburg Destinations and others and the merchants in town, they are thinking beyond just the military history. So the kind of tourist we get has probably changed. That said, the military park and the 3 days of people trying to kill each other is still the main reason why why it's become that, why it's become even something that others might be interested in attending. If it wasn't for those visitors, we wouldn't have all these little cafes and eateries and boutiques, and we got a 6 or 7 theater cinema right outside of town. I mean, what towns of 7,500 have a big theater, movie theater?
Mm.
Um,
Well, I also just looked, you almost had a casino.
yeah, right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Uh, yeah. So it is a the juxtaposition of the horror of the battle with what the battlefield and the town has become is remains fascinating. So.
Mm,
Well, along those lines, when I was talking about when I mentioned cynical, I was thinking about money because it's all about the money. For a lot of, I don't know how much money the Civil War Institute makes. I don't know how much it charges. I don't know how much it makes. I don't know where that money goes. Does it go into like a trust for the college or?
Uh, yeah, I don't know how much money they got. Civil War Institute, I don't think they come out ahead by much each year. Um,
Do they pay the
mhm,
historians who?
yeah, I
Uh,
don't know how much they pay. So I think I've done in the 20 some years I've been here, I think I've done 2 panels maybe,
mm,
but they don't pay me because I'm a college employee. So
right.
I can't be paid. That's one of the rules. Um, but other folks they bring in, I have no idea how much they get paid. There's also, as you may know, there's a big conference here each year that's
Oh
around
yeah,
the
the
same
local
time
one.
as CWI about Lincoln, and uh, that brings a lot of big name historians. That's not hosted at the college. That's a completely separate from the college, but some people kind of view it as a competing uh, conference or institute, whatever it's called. And
because
they that might actually make money. I think they may actually come out ahead.
Mm,
because I think doesn't the Civil War Institute cost at least $1,000?
I don't
To
remember.
attend, I don't know. I don't know what the cost is because
But
I get to go to panels and stuff as an audience member for
Yeah,
free. So I don't know what the
yeah,
well, I
yeah.
mean,
Because I think the tuition was kind of what it was steep, and then when you figure in lodging or accommodation, yeah, I mean it comes out to quite a bit, and I think they cater a lot to teachers.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
yes.
And I don't know if a standard and an average history or social studies teacher from you know
France.
well I was going to say from anywhere from Nebraska uh,
Mm,
could afford to go without some kind of financial aid, but since it's not accredited as
mm,
coursework.
They do have, and I'm just looking up. I have some financial figures for an article I just wrote for a European journal, interdisciplinary journal, um, to see what the financial benefit to the town is. But I don't have figures on CWI in particular. They do have some offers of financial support for people, and I thought they had a scale, a graduated scale, so maybe like middle and high school teachers pay less than a college professor or something like that. But um, yeah, but I mean they're well supported, they're well funded, but I don't think that they make much money on it, given once they everything it costs them to put it on and I think they try to keep the fees that they charge people reasonable. So for the town, the figures I have in 2023, visitors spent $786 million in the county, in Adams County, uh, which accounted for
Jeez.
$80 million in taxes, 5,000 jobs, and $175 million in wages. So it's the tourism. So the other big industry in the county is agriculture, apples in particular. My wife works in the agricultural industry. And I don't know which makes more money, the agricultural industry or the tourist industry, but the tourist industry is obviously a huge part of the economic well-being of the county and the town, which actually we call it it's a borough. Gettysburg is a borough, not a town, but
Yeah, I saw that. Um, in relation to other counties in Pennsylvania, how how rich or how well off is Adams County?
I don't know, couldn't tell you.
Yeah, sorry,
I'm
random.
sure, so to our west is Franklin County. Um, they have a much bigger city, Chambersburg, and a couple other towns that are much bigger. So that probably helps them. I'm sure we're better off than many of the other rural counties in Pennsylvania, but probably not as well off as others with bigger population centers.
Yeah.
I just did look, and it's like for tuition, meal plan, on-campus lodging at the institute, it's $1,075
Wow, that's a lot.
for 5 days.
Okay. And I think on average they have about 300 people for
Hmm.
the for those 5 days.
That was Scrooge McDuck. My eyes would turn into dollar signs now.
Yeah. I mean, you'd have to check me on that. Maybe it's less than that, but for
Yeah.
some reason that's what I recall.
Yeah. So should we go to the other organizations that I think we should briefly at least, I think we had it last time on the list briefly, but I think we should talk about
I think you
the
need to.
American Battlefield Trust too, because they have been buying a good number of properties in the region. I just saw a post they like took down a building to create a nice vista and in of the battlefield's historic kind of looks.
Yeah, and so they just, let's see, a couple years ago they bought land that's to the west of town, by McPherson's Ridge, just past that.
Mm.
And then they just closed a deal on the Country Club, which is a little bit further west of that. So they have all that property leading up to McPherson's Ridge. And the Country Club has been out of business for a while. There was a golf course there, which has been, reverting back to nature, much of it, and a swimming pool and a tennis court, and a building. So all of that, I assume that's probably the building you're referring to is going to go. And I'm not entirely sure what the relationship between them and the battlefield is with the federal government is either, and how that all works. So, for instance, just up from my house, General Lee's headquarters, which was a woman's house whose name is escaping my memory right now. It's on
Thompson?
the right side of what's that?
Thompson?
Yeah, that sounds right. No,
It says Thompson House,
yeah,
Lee's headquarters.
what's that?
Thompson House, Lee headquarters.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
I'm just looking at it on
Yeah,
Buford Avenue.
yep, yeah, that's it. So uh that used to be, when I moved here, that was a motel.
Hmm.
And so that they bought that, took the motel down, restored it, the house. It's very nice piece of property. It has the battlefield on the west side of it and the seminary on the south side of it. And most days, the parking lot for the Lee headquarters is empty.
Hmm.
And even on busy weekends, like the anniversary weekend, July 1st through 3rd or whatever weekend is near that, even then, there might be, sometimes they have people camping there. They have living historians or reenactors camping there. But I think when I went by it on that weekend, there might have been half a dozen cars there. So I've never seen that parking lot full. So it's not well traveled, not in comparison to other parts of the park.
Hmm.
So yeah, I don't know how, the two of them, what their conversation is between those two organizations.
Do they have like their own like wayside markers and explanatory and like I guess not admission, but like
Yeah,
interpretation?
yeah, for like the Lee headquarters, they do on that I don't know, it's an acre or so. They've got markers there, a few of them. And occasionally they open the house, people can go in. Um, some of the other properties that they own haven't been developed yet on other that are also connected to the battlefield. They have signs, noting that the Battlefield Trust owns it, but they're not. I don't know if they're waiting for more funding to develop them, or
Right.
my guess is the National Military Park Federal government is happy to have their assistance.
Mm,
But I don't know how they talk to each other as far as encouraging visitation to, one to the other.
mm. Well, that would
I
be
must be
interesting.
really, I must be really naive because I thought that the Battlefield Trust uh, seeded. I thought they bought land, took in donations, um, collected funds to buy land,
Hmm.
save property,
Hmm.
and I thought they ceded it to the federal government for preservation.
Nope.
I mean, I assume they could if they wished, and maybe I don't know if there have been instances of that in the past. I probably should know that. I'll have to look that up. But uh, the Lee headquarters, for instance, it's been in place for several years, and it's not part of the park. I mean, it's right next to the park is adjacent to it. Border it comes the park land comes right up to the fence of the American Battlefield Trust land.
No, it's like I think the big problem there is that goes back to what Scott mentioned earlier, is that to integrate the land into the park, you need an act of Congress to enlarge the boundaries. And once the boundary is larger, then you can integrate that piece of land through purchase or donation. So I think that's what, like, I remember the that first big purchase, it wasn't called Battlefield Trust yet, did down in Fredericksburg, Slaughter Pan. It's still not part of the park. It's still owned by the Battlefield Trust today. So they just haven't done the transfer because the boundary has never been adjusted.
And I don't know if the part of this, but when the more land they have, that's the more they have to maintain. That's
Hmm.
more cost. And I wonder if there's also more hesitancy. Probably it's probably not directly a direct causal factor, but I don't know if you know the story of the Lee statue at Antietam. Um, So there's a statue to Robert E. Lee at Antietam. It's not the greatest monument of Lee. It's Lee on a horse, naturally,
Mm.
and uh, it has a plaque on it. I can't remember. You can probably find it online what the plaque says, and it is a very lost cause commemoration of Lee.
Oh.
So that land was owned by a private landowner, and he had the monument made, and then after the monument was made, he donated the land to the federal government.
Mm.
So once it got donated and the federal government accepted it, that monument now cannot be changed without an act of Congress. And there
Oof.
were a few Democratic congressmen from Maryland who, for years, tried to introduce a bill to get that Lee statue removed or altered, and were never successful. I don't know if they're still trying to do that or if they've given up. But as I said, it's probably not a direct causal factor, but I do wonder if for
Mm.
some folks in the park, if they kind of have things like that in the back of their mind, that they got stuck with something that they really don't want.
Right. And Lee's headquarters could be powder keggy, and what stories do you have to tell with it? And I just looked on the maps that the Park Service has online, and it's like right there where the Lee's headquarters is. It's like the turn of the park route, and it's like there's nothing on the map that says Lee's headquarters here.
Yeah, yeah, because it's not them.
Not theirs.
And Battlefield Trust, I mean, they've done a good job with that. The signs that they have are not, they don't critique Lee, but they don't praise Lee. They're not lost cause.
Mm.
It's fairly neutral as far as that kind of stuff
Mm.
goes. There's no, it's not a bad history or a bad story that they're telling on that land.
Right.
And as you probably know, the reality is during the battle, Lee didn't actually use that house much as a headquarters. It's officially noted as his headquarters. They said for the most part he was out along what's now West Confederate Ave on Seminary Ridge, and so I don't know if that's part of the reason why maybe the military park isn't all that interested in it anyway.
There was such great movie scenes in Gettysburg that happened in the house.
Yeah, just falling asleep on in the rocking chair. Yeah.
And
Are
was it
you-
Trimble that slammed his
Yeah.
fist on the
Is this the
Oh,
movie you're referring to?
yeah.
yeah,
I
of
have
course.
never,
Yeah.
I have never seen it.
Good for
Oh,
you. Good
good.
for you.
Yeah.
I've tried watching it a few times and I just can't get past the first half hour or so. I probably should make myself watch it because so many people have.
Yeah,
But
just don't watch the director's cut.
okay, all right.
Yeah, it's long.
Yeah, how long? I mean, the movie it's isn't the regular movie like 4 hours?
3.5?
Three and a
Yeah.
half,
Three and a
something like
half?
that. But the
Okay.
director cut's like five, 4.5, five.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have time for that. No.
Yeah, no. That's a whole lot of stuck on beards. I mean,
Okay.
Bad ones too. Very bad
yeah.
ones. Good God.
Um,
So I don't
Well,
know if you
yeah.
want to, well, go
yeah,
ahead.
I was
Well,
gonna.
so, oh
Hmm?
yeah, go ahead, Niels. Yeah, go ahead.
No, no, I was gonna point to you, so it's your turn.
Well, so any modification at all to a national park's boundaries or anything that's contained within the monument or the battlefield or national park requires an act of Congress,
Hmm.
even extending even extending the boundaries.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yep.
So then, what about the work to restoration of the battlefield to look more like it did at the time? Does that require any? I mean, it takes funding. It takes um, well,
I
manpower.
don't
It takes
think, yeah, I don't, I'd have to double check. I don't think that requires any legislation because so that like Gettysburg National Military Park, they have, there's the superintendent and under her are two chief rangers and one, Chris Gwynn, he's the chief of interpretation education. So he's responsible for education and interpretation of history, like what the signs say, the programs they run, all that sort of stuff. The other one, as I understand it, is responsible for maintenance, for maintaining the park.
Hmm.
And so as I hear from rangers that's their two jobs at a place like Gettysburg and probably all national parks is educating the public and maintaining the land that they've been charged to protect and preserve. And so maintaining is, mowing the grass. It's if there's a monument, every several years as dirt and debris builds up, cleaning that. If there's any damage or vandalism, fixing that. And I would assume that would also include, like they did at Gettysburg, sometimes cutting down trees that weren't there in 1863
Hmm.
or planting trees.
Yeah.
And they don't have the manpower or woman power or money to do anywhere near as much as they want. And so as if you've been to Gettysburg, there are places that are overgrown with
Mhm.
underbrush that were not overgrown in 1863, that were farmers' fields or just kind of clear meadows. And occasionally what they do, they did this this summer and it was, I wasn't here. I wanted to volunteer for, I wasn't here when they did it, is they'll ask people to just volunteer an afternoon to come out and help them just clear brush.
Hmm.
And because they don't have as many people as they would ideally like to have to do that. And so they're trying to restore it to that, but there's many parts of the military park that don't look like they did in 63 because they can't keep up with it.
yeah.
Um, which, and part of the interesting thing about all that is one of the things I find kind of fascinating is if you think about the landscape here, for centuries before Europeans came, right, this landscape was probably gradually maintained and changed by different Native American groups, Lenape and others, who were here for centuries. And then when white settlers came, they turned it into the kind of farms that people usually think of when they probably think about American farms. And so that's 100 years or so before the battle. And then you have 3 days of battle. And those 3 days of battle have in many ways frozen the landscape in time, right? So what was a changing landscape for millennia becomes locked into one thing, becomes frozen like and iconic, places like the Peach Orchard, which before 1863 was just a peach orchard. Now it's the peach orchard,
Mm.
or the
Mm.
wheat field or the railroad cut or whatever it may be. And but the odd juxtaposition is, well, those places are frozen quite intentionally because they have a purpose of reminding Americans what sacrifice is supposed to be about and what commitment and citizenship and all these kinds of things. And they're supposed to have this educational purpose. So they're frozen, but they're not frozen because in order to accomplish those purposes, you're putting up monuments and memorials, or you're putting in roads that weren't there in 1863, or you're changing roads that were there. So you're doing all these kinds of things to, kind of keep it semi-frozen, perhaps. But all of that takes time, money, and commitment, and people, right?
Well,
So
and
which,
then you're also promoting preservation, conservation, and you're calling thousands, millions of tourists, hundreds of thousands of tourists to take their cars and drive in these areas as well. So creating all sorts of traffic and pollution.
yeah, and I think, yeah, I think I'm probably, if I'm repeating some of this from the previous podcast and edit it out, but I ride my bike and walk on the battlefield all the time. And so it's this, going back to what we were talking about earlier, Gettysburg as this romantic town, but also the battlefield. They're part of the marking of the battlefield is it's a nice place to come and walk around or bike around with your Boy Scout troop or your family or whatever it is, especially if you come when there's not a tremendous amount of traffic. It is really peaceful and bucolic. The best time to go on the battlefield, next time you all come, if you want quiet and peace, is a late Sunday afternoon, at like 4 to 5 o'clock on, because the tourists are leaving, the ones who have been here for the week or the weekend, the few who are staying are out to dinner. So summers, Sunday between like 5 and 8 o'clock, there's hardly anybody out on the roads in the battlefield, or the trails or whatever. So it's this weird bucolic experience, walking among death and wounded and people, these men who are groaning and screaming in the field. The juxtaposition just never fails to get me when I'm out there. So,
But I think we should also get to what the important part for today was,
Yeah.
sort of the experiences of the anniversary that you had and saw, and sort of the whether this sort of is a place of healing for the country as it's suffering from extreme partisanship, or if it's like fostering even more partisanship. I guess that's sort of the question that we raised last time for you to kind of observe.
yeah, so I went just for one day, not even the whole day. It's $45 to get in. So yeah, and I took a friend of mine, and since I asked this friend of mine to come with me, his name's Clotaire. He's a Haitian immigrant. He's a U.S. citizen. So my wife was kind of concerned about me going, amid this political climate, and I said, "Well, I'm bringing my friend Clotaire. He's a lot darker skinned than me." She said, "That doesn't make me feel better." But
Mhm.
the two of you going there. But um,
Thank you for letting him
so
go, Miss Hancock, if you hear us.
yeah, yeah. But so it was fascinating, and I've never been to a reenactment. I've walked by them before, and it's on private land. The federal park hasn't let them have reenactments on federal land for decades. Uh, so it's on private land. It's a place called the Daniel Lady Farm, and the Daniel Lady Farm on one of their barn buildings has a sign. I have a photo of it. Let me find it. And the sign says, "We do history here. We don't glorify it. We don't propagandize it, and we certainly do not trivialize it. History is not always glamorous. It can be messy, ugly, and brutal, but we choose to remember history and not hide it, lest we end up repeating that which we forgot." Which I think that's a great sentiment, although maybe you share my skepticism about that often repeated quote about, we need to know the history so we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. I
Mm.
think we repeat the mistakes of the past all the time in new
all
and
the time.
inventive ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but I love the general sentiment there. And I think they actually do try at this place at Daniel Lady Farm. I don't know any of the owners. I emailed them afterwards, never heard back. I'll tell you why in a minute. So I'm not promoting or denigrating what they're doing there. Um, it is a well-attended event.
Mm.
I don't know how many people were there, but it was pretty crowded. It was on a Saturday, probably it was sunny, probably 85, 90 degrees. So not brutal, but not a cool, pleasant summer day. So it was impressive the amount of people were out there. And they have it divided into two general sections. And the one section is the reenactment where they actually reenact parts of the battle. And so the day I went, they were reenacting McPherson's Ridge. So that's where they have the living historians or reenactors out there. And they have pretty strict guidelines about what they can wear, what's considered appropriate, because they want it to be authentic. Um, I wish I had had a military historian with me to be able to tell, not so much to tell me like, well, is that actually like the buttons that would have been on the uniform, but in terms of how they did the reenactment itself, how the soldiers were lined up, how they were marching, all that to tell me, yes, this is pretty realistic. There are parts of it that seemed realistic to me. There are parts of it that I thought I'm not a military expert, but from what I know, from what I'm reading, seems unlikely. Um, there is an extremely low casualty rate, for instance, even though these two lines of soldiers were probably no more at one point than 30 yards apart, firing at each other and hardly anybody dropping. So they're either awful shots or, and I know I don't mean to make fun of them, but if I was one of these people, I would not want to be the one to volunteer to say, yeah, okay, I'll be one who gets wounded, because then you're laying there. And because they do emphasize having authentic gear, those are not lightweight clothes they're wearing, and they're laying there in the sun in a farm field.
Mm.
So I get why nobody wants to do that. And a few of them did, kudos to those who did. But I suspect that the casualty rate in the reenactment doesn't compare to the actual casualty rate of the battle itself. Uh, they have cannon crews there, incredibly loud.
Mm.
Um, and, even again, I don't know, from what I know, probably where the cannons were placed were not the distance of all of them. Well, some of it would have been probably the right amount of distance from behind the infantry as well as who they were shooting at. If it's like the parts of the battle where they're close enough to be shooting grape and canister. But some of that is limited by the amount of space they have. They don't, it's on a private farm. And they also have a huge set of bleachers that you pay extra for if you want to sit in the bleachers. And the bleachers are
Wait,
pretty
for
full.
45, you don't even get to sit in the bleachers?
45, you get to stand along the edge of the field and watch. Uh,
My God.
and they have a loudspeaker
Hmm.
over which somebody is narrating what happens, which in a way I think, well, that's actually smart because it's educational, right? They're
Hmm.
explaining to people who may not know, well, this is why this group is doing this, that, or the third. But it's also kind of weird, right? That you've got these metal bleachers and this loudspeaker while there's a reenactment of a deadly battle going on. So it's another kind of odd. I get why they do that. I'm not sure if there's a better way to do that or not. Um, the other part, the one that I was kind of more interested in, I was surprised at how many tents selling merchandise there were. A lot of Confederate merchandise and Union, a lot of Confederate flags and things like that. Uh,
Like sort of historic or sort of like the guys that has like the big China made rectangular Confederate flag in 20 different versions.
yeah, so most of them seem to be actually historic replicas of the different, like
Okay.
the different versions of the Confederate national flags. the Confederate battle flag.
Hmm.
There were some that looked more like, and as I tell people often, that when you see the Confederate flag on a bumper sticker, that's just the rectangular one.
Right.
That's actually the naval jack, the Confederate naval jack. The Confederate battle
Mm.
flag, as probably most of your listeners, is a square with a white border around the edge of it. And when I see people with that, I think, okay, that's somebody that knows their history,
Hmm.
which means it's either more problematic that they have that on their bumper sticker or their T-shirt, or maybe means they're more open to conversation about it. I don't know, So, but
Because that's also the flag they use for the Sons of Confederate Veterans
Hmm.
for the
yes,
logo.
Yeah.
yeah, and so I was. I mean, again, so the Daniel Lady Farm is a private organization. I get they've got to make money in order to do this. So I'm not criticizing that they had all of these tents with merchandise. It just surprised me. I wasn't expecting that. Um, but then they had a tent for speakers or performances, and so my friend and I got there at noon because we wanted to hear. They had a descendant of Nathan Bedford Forrest who was speaking at noon.
Oh.
And and this is part of why my wife was uneasy about me going, but I said, I'm not going to cause trouble. I want to go with an open mind and think, well, maybe this person will talk about his complicated history, his involvement with the KKK, with the Fort Pillow massacre, as a slave
Mhm.
trader, things like that. And it could be a really good educational experience for the audience. There was about 150 people under this tent, so it was pretty full. And and I actually did kind of hope for that. That's not what happened. And so the reenactor, living historian, was dressed as Nathan Bedford Forrest and spoke for the most part in the first person. And so the middle
Oh,
section, he talked mostly about different battles and stuff that he's in. It was the military stuff, which I thought that was, all probably very educational and useful. And by the way, he said at one point he was a fifth cousin, descendant of Nathan Bedford Forrest. And I think it's important that we, as historians, we don't mock people that we disagree with. But this was hard for me to hear. So when I heard a fifth cousin, I thought that's pretty well removed.
Mm.
I mean, Andrew, you might be the fifth cousin of Nathan Bedford
yeah.
Forrest,
I mean,
for all.
I can't
Um,
even think how far away that is actually.
yeah, it's a good bit, right? But I believe him that he is a descendant, and he knew, like, he's done his work. He's done his homework on a lot of Nathan Bedford Forrest because he knew a lot of detail. So that was impressive. But the problematic parts of it were, and this kind of dovetails in some ways with that article that you all pointed me toward that we talked about last time. That I was it in the Smithsonian about the person who,
Politico.
Yeah.
Hmm.
yeah, Politico, that's right, who went last year
Hmm.
to the reenactment. And because in that article, that writer said, people didn't seem to want to talk a lot about politics, right? They kind of wanted to shy away from that. And if they did, they seemed to mostly lean toward the right, or sympathetic to MAGA, if not full in. And I didn't talk to anybody who said things like that. There certainly were MAGA hats, people wearing
Mm.
Make America Great Again hats and some shirts and things like that. They weren't ubiquitous. It's not like every other person had one, but they were definitely there. The people there, 95% or more were white. Um, oh, some friend. I don't know how this played out. When I first rode my bike out there to get tickets, and there was a black man dressed as a slave.
Ooh.
And I wanted to ask him, so what do you do? Because I thought maybe like this could be really bad, or it could be useful if he's actually going
Hmm.
to depict the fact that the Confederates brought enslaved laborers with them. When I went back late in the day, when I actually entered with my friend, I did not see him, couldn't find him. So I don't know what his role in that was. But anyway, so the problematic parts of Nathan Bedford Forrest, as we walked up, Clotaire and I walked up, he had just started and he was saying that acknowledging the controversy about the KKK, but he said, how could I have been part of an organization that didn't start till 1950 because I was dead? He said, that's
What?
fake news. So, one, the problem is, right, historically, his facts are just wrong. We know the KKK started in 1867. We know that Forrest was a grand wizard in the KKK. I think there's some folks who say that Forrest started the KKK. I'm not sure historically you can support that he started it, but he was certainly on the ground floor, you know. And as you may know, there's also evidence that he actually discouraged the KKK in 1868 or 60, I think 69, when the federal government was clamping down. And the apologists for Forrest would say, well, he discouraged them because it was getting too violent. He wanted to just be a political organization, became more than that. I think most historians would say that's unlikely. That's a really generous interpretation. That what seems to fit more is that he was he was trying to squelch the KKK because it was creating too many problems with the federal government's enforcement. Not that, so it wasn't that he was unsympathetic to them or their goals, but it was becoming too politically risky. So that's the first thing we heard. So I kind of thought, here we go. And of course, he's also using the term fake news while he's talking in the first person. So, that's quite the anachronism there. Then he started talking about Forrest as a slave trader, which I thought, well, that's great that he's addressing that Forrest is a slave trader. So this is what he said, and I wrote all this down. So he said that, I traded slaves, but people said that I made $1.5 million off the slave trade. That's fake news. So he kept using this term fake news. Most of the audience, not all, were laughing. We're kind of joining in with him. And by the way, Forrest himself told a reporter after the war he made $1.5 million. So it's not that people said it. Like if I was talking to the reenactor, I'd say, no, you said that. But although I think historians have think that he actually made $1 million, that he was exaggerating when he said he made $1.5 million. So the reenactor said, I didn't make $1.5 million because I was a slave trader for 5 years. We sold about 100 enslaved people a year. He didn't use the term enslaved. On an average of $1,000 per slave. So he said, do the math. That's 100,000 a year, but I had a partner. So I only had half of that. Plus I had expenses. So I only made about $25,000 per year. So, and then he repeated, it's fake news that I made $1.5 million because that doesn't, he said, do the math. That doesn't add up. $1.5 million, which I'm thinking, even if you only made $25,000 a year in profit, in the late 1850s, you're a rich man. He went on to say that it's a myth that slaves were poorly treated. He said slaves, and this is a direct quote, most slaves were treated exceptionally well, and then moved on. He said the Battle of Gettysburg was a draw. That the Confederates left the field and the Union stayed, but it was a draw. Later, when he talked about Chickamauga, where the Confederates stayed on the field and the Union left, he said that was a great Confederate victory, but he didn't explain why Gettysburg was a draw and Chickamauga was a victory for the Confederates. And I'm forgetting something else he said that was not only egregious, but just historically inaccurate. So then it went to the Q&A. Right? So if people ask questions, I put my hand up. He didn't have to pick me, but he did. So
I see you just made a mistake.
Yeah. So we're kind of, chuckling about this, but I wanted to have a posture and attitude of not being aggressive, not being there to try and make him look ridiculous or anything like that. Probably when I was asking the question, I'm sure some of the frustration or anger crept into my voice. So I said, thank you for doing this. So I'm curious how you would address or respond to your involvement at the massacre at Fort Pillow. So I was trying to be careful not to say like you massacred black troops, but just, what you think about how you would address that,
Oh.
and also how you would address being a grand wizard of the KKK that was founded in 1867. And I wanted to say that because I wanted the audience to at least know, okay, the KKK did not start in 1950. He never addressed the latter part. So when I said that, he pointed at me and he said, okay, here we go. He said, come up here. So he waved me to the front where he was standing, which surprised me. So I went up there and I thought, okay, maybe this will actually be good. Like maybe we'll actually have a debate, not a screaming argument, but like actually be able to talk about this somewhat reasonably. So I come up there and then he points at me and he says to the audience, he said, this man is lying to you.
Ah,
And so I just pointed back at him and I said, nope, you're lying. and and the audience laughed. I don't know if they were laughing at me or at him or the two of us or the situation or what. And then it was interesting because when I said that, you're lying, his face changed to anger. And uh, and then he told me to go, he said, go back to where you came from. And I don't know if he meant like sometimes, and I'm not saying he's a racist white guy. I don't know him from Adam, but that's a common thing that both me and my friend have heard before, go back to where you came from. Heard people tell us go back to Africa, or if he just meant like go back to where you were standing. And so my reply was, you're the one who called me up here, but this is what happens when people hear the truth. And then I just walked back. And there's a part of me that kind of regrets that I did. I kind of wish I had stayed there and, try to engage him respectfully. Not sure. I doubt it would have done any good. So then he went to explain to the audience how it wasn't a massacre at Fort Pillow, that it was just a fight that the Confederates won. I was shaking my head. He pointed to me and he said, don't shake your head. So I just yelled out back at him. I said, it was a massacre. And he continued talking. Oh, and earlier in the talk, he had talked about Union atrocities during the war, several Union atrocities.
of course.
Then I just yelled out at him and I said, did the Confederate Army commit any atrocities during the war? And he paused for a second and he said, well, I don't know. I didn't. And then he just continued. So what was interesting is after that, so when I walked back, two of the people who were sitting and standing near me, and during the rest of the afternoon on like 4 or 5 different occasions, people came up to me and quietly said, appreciate you doing that or calling them out or getting the facts right. I have no idea if they're representative because people who disagreed with me and thought that he was telling them good history, they're probably not going to come up to me and say anything, right? So, but what I find kind of interesting about these experiences, it seems like the people who do that usually do it quietly, right? They come up to me quietly, kind of say, "Oh, I appreciate what you had to say," with the exception of one young white man who was not quiet at all, who came up and said, "Hey, that was great, and my dad and I come to Gettysburg every year, and yeah, we know the history of Forrest and like that. What the stuff he was saying was so far removed, but he was the exception, not the rule." So subsequently, I emailed Daniel Lady Farm and just said, you guys put on a great event, blah blah blah. Thanks for doing this. I think you might want to screen your living historians more closely because the things that he said here's the things that he said that were factually inaccurate. And here's the things he said that at the very least were extremely problematic. But I haven't heard back from them. That was a few weeks ago. So I don't know if that will lead to anything. So anyway, so that's my limited anecdotal experience of the reenactment. I probably will never go to another one not at $45. It's one of these things. I think there's great potential and great value in them because they draw people who aren't going to do other kinds of history or read other kinds of history. They're not going to come to one of our lectures, but they'll do that. Uh, but my question, I think, for organizers like that is if you're going to have people like the reenactor Nathan Bedford Forrest
Mm.
say those kind of things without, at the very least, an opportunity for discussion or rebuttal, or just getting the facts right, then I think you're doing more harm than good. I
Mm.
think you are, as their sign said, I think you are propagandizing history. Um, and I don't know, maybe they'll never have them back. Maybe they didn't know. Maybe it was a one-off. I don't know if that's something that happens there regularly or not.
Yeah, it sounds very much like sort of like what you experience as a polar opposite of the healings that the political reporter kind of felt and saw. But at the same time, I'm kind of also thinking it's it's such crazy like lost cause mythologizing there that it's just like how you can't deal with that, right? I mean, it's like they like you said, they weren't wanting to listen, and how many of the people who are there are just sort of silently like, oh yeah, this was nice, and go on, and they're like they don't never think about it that they heard total falsehoods there.
Yeah, and that's why I think actually like what they do there is a great opportunity.
Yeah.
Like I'm saying, because you're going to reach people who aren't going to go to other stuff.
Mm.
So if you had a reenactor of Nathan Bedford Forrest who was less lost cause or less
Mm.
wedded to the lost cause, even if they say some things, like even if they want, there's this story of Nathan Bedford Forrest that he becomes, I think, in the 1870s before he dies, that he becomes a committed Christian, a follower of Jesus Christ, and is actually trying to be somewhat reconciliationist
Mm.
with other folks, including African Americans. I'm a bit suspect of those stories, but it could have happened. We know Longstreet surprised people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you had somebody who talked about his slave trading experience, and if they were more sympathetic to like those stories of Forrest after the war, and if they wanted to portray Forrest that way, fine. And then if you have somebody up there who can ask the questions about, well, how do we know these things? Or is there another perspective? And you can have a discussion or something like that. I think that would be tremendous for people in that audience. And it's not so much to get them to change how if they're in on the lost cause, if they're all in on that, it's not so much to get them to change their perspective entirely, but I think there are ways to get them to at least pause,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And ask a question or consider a question. And so I think they have the opportunity to get people like that to pause and at least think about questions in ways that we don't. And so I hope they think about that kind of stuff or reconsider people like that.
Mm.
Well, I had a question about the people, the attendees. What was the average age, do you think?
So I was actually surprised by the range of age there because I thought it was going to be definitely older.
Yeah.
Um, but I would say probably the average age trended older. But there are a lot of folks, their families, a lot of folks in probably in their 20s and 30s or 40s with middle school age kids, kids between 8 and 13. Um, they weren't the majority, but there was a healthy number. So it was a broader age range than I was expecting.
Mm.
Yeah, because it seems like it would be something that was catering to more middle age, middle age slash older people who grew up on the Lost Cause. I'm talking about white people, of course,
Yeah. I
because it sounded like a 1950s discourse.
Yeah, well that and again, because they had other talks and events, and I want to be fair to the Daniel Lady Farm people. I don't know if Nathan Bedford Forrest's descendant is typical of all of
Mm.
the speakers and different things they have. I wouldn't be surprised if it was, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they had more than that. In fact, they had one woman there who's dressed up in period gear who was playing a woman from New Hampshire. After Nathan Bedford Forrest was done, she got up and she said, "Well, I don't agree with anything he said." I don't know if she was referring specifically to the things I objected to, or if she was speaking as, a white woman from New Hampshire in 1863 probably is going to have a lot of sympathy for Nathan Bedford Forrest in that at that time. But there's great potential there, great potential for harm and great potential for good. So
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
but
Good. Good.
why was Nathan Bedford Forrest there? Why was he represented there?
The $1 million
I
question.
yeah, my guess is because they know that he'll draw people.
Hmm.
So, for instance, there was a talk that I saw later. I didn't listen to more than my friend and I only listened to about 10 or 15 minutes of it. And it was a Union general. Don't remember what he was talking about. The tent was probably not even half of what it was for Bedford Forest.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, there's something about, I think, when you get descendants in,
Hmm.
and my guess is the fact that he was, reenacting Confederate general probably is going to draw more than Union general. But if somebody said they're a descendant of Ulysses S. Grant or you know or Meade,
Hmm.
Meade probably isn't as well known a name. They probably would have gotten a pretty good audience too. But my guess is,
Well,
yeah, they know that he'll draw people.
it's I'm on the website for the reenactment. It says, while the major events feature reenactments and demonstrations, each day is filled with dozens of vendors, lectures, and other educational opportunities around the farm. That includes numerous events within the event's living history tent, which I'm sure is where you saw Nathan Bedford Forrest, including the story of General Nathan Bedford Forrest as told by one of his descendants. So they mention uh, the fact that the man doing the impression was a descendant, but they don't name him. So I
Hmm.
think what you're saying is
Yeah,
right.
I had to look him up to find out who the person actually is, and it was not easy because apparently there are a few people who uh, claim that and I don't mean claim like he's lying, but say that they're descendants of Nathan Bedford Forrest who do this sort of thing.
Oh, good God, that there's a business in making.
Well, I mean, Shelby Foote really did a number. I mean, with the Civil War series, the PBS series. I mean, what you were saying really sounded like it sounded like
Yeah,
Shelby Foote talking about the Civil War or talking about Nathan Bedford Forrest.
there's that. Yeah. I I will say, I mean,
Yeah, you
I
all are breaking up on me, freezing up on me little bit. But yeah, if what you're saying you sound like Shelby Foote, yeah, I'd agree. Yeah.
yeah, no, I watched a short, like 2 minute news clip earlier today of the exact that reenactment, and I kind of agree with sort of the video material I saw. The soldiers lining up was terrible. Like the few casualties lying on the ground was exactly sort of what you're describing. But I think it was the guy in charge of the farm or something. He was dressed in a Union, uh, U.S. military uniform, and he kind of tried to present like we're doing goods history here. We're doing, and what you're saying is the exact opposite of that, right? It's sort of like the message publicly versus the message that their speakers are delivering seems to be not in sync.
Yeah, although I want to qualify that with, I have a very small sample
Right.
size. I think to really know, I would need to go for all 3 days and go to a bunch of different
Mm,
speakers and different events. Uh, and but yeah, based on the small sample size that I saw,
mm.
if somebody was really interested in learning about the Civil War, I would not recommend that they go to that.
Go to the battlefield.
So, if
Last
Yeah.
question because
for,
we're making him
yeah,
late.
yeah, we're sorry. So, I think we're in agreement that this is bad history. That Myth of Bedford Forest and the
Mm.
reenactor was giving it was propagating. I don't know, is the right word. Bad
Yeah.
history. Um, and so you shouldn't go to reenactment to get good history. Could we then be considered as gatekeepers for
Hmm.
what we consider to be good history?
Uh,
Mm.
yeah.
Tough one.
Well, I
Sorry.
guess here's why I would say no. Although, I'm biased in favor of myself. Uh, but I would say no, I'm not being a gatekeeper because I would not tell people don't go to that. And I'm qualifying this as it's my opinion. In my opinion, based on what I saw, which admittedly is not comprehensive, I wouldn't recommend it.
Mm.
Um, if the goal is to learn a thorough history, because there are many other avenues to do that that are free or
Right.
much lower cost.
Mm.
Uh, if you want to learn about what reenactments are like, then by all means go to
Mm.
it because it's probably one of the better attended ones by Civil War folks.
Mm.
Um, but I guess to me it seems like and maybe I'm thinking about what a gatekeeper is too narrowly. I think a gatekeeper actively tries to keep people out of something or, limit control who's going in. I'm not trying to actively keep people out of this. It's not like I've gone on social media, on Facebook or written articles about, oh, the Daniel Lady Farm reenactment, is a terrible revisionist history. And if anything, I'd say I emailed them and said, hey, you know, I think you could do great things here. I think maybe there's some things you could rethink. So I don't know. Is that a convoluted response, Andrew?
Well, I guess the
I think
que like
it
I
was
guess
an unanswerable question.
I guess to make it more answerable would be to say, would it be better to not do a reenactment, but do a more weapon demonstration kind of stuff on the National Park Service site and do tours, presentations, ranger talks, and that becomes the thing instead of this, I will call it carnival.
Yeah. So if you wanted to learn about the military aspect, so how the soldiers lined up, how they advanced, how they retreated, how they march at an oblique angle, or
Mm.
all these other things, then I I don't think what I saw is where to go because there are a few things, and I won't get into detail. There are a few things that I saw that I thought I'm pretty sure nothing like that ever happened. I could be wrong, but there are just some things that just seems so well, like the word you use, the
Yeah.
carnivalistic, and um, whereas the Park Service, so I don't get any money from the Park Service, so I have no vested interest in this. But like they do these free battle walks on
Hmm.
weekends that I usually go to when I can, that a park ranger runs, and the
Hmm.
other rangers do other things as well that are free, and these are great because what they'll take you out on sites in the battlefield, so you're there where it happened, and they'll explain to you, so this is how they went up this ridge. What they often do, which is actually pretty useful, is they'll take some of the visitors like me in the battle walk and they'll line you up.
Hmm.
Not like, 100 people, but they'll say three or four and they'll say, okay, so imagine this is company A. I just went on one a few weeks ago, learned something I never learned before. They said, so this is company A, company B, DE. They said company, the company A, the one in the center is the one that they usually put that is sort of the leader, that is the most
Hmm.
tested, the most reliable. And so they show you how they're going to shift or change the direction they're
Hmm.
facing. And the way that they help people visualize what actually happened at Little Round Top or McPherson's Ridge or Culp's Hill or whatever is such a great learning tool.
Hmm.
And they have live demonstrations of cannons and sharpshooters and things like that. They do this at the battlefield every summer.
Mm.
and other battlefields, and Revolutionary War battlefields and stuff like that. Um, so those are places where I would recommend, yeah, that's where you should go if you want to learn that stuff. If you want to learn the other things like about, so who was Nathan Bedford Forrest and what did he do? There's plenty of books and articles and documentaries or
Mm.
talks or other things you can go to
Right.
where you can hear people wrestle with all this.
Mm.
That I would recommend would be a much better way to learn about all of these things. But all that said, like I said before, there are people who go to these reenactments who are never going to go to that stuff,
Right.
right? So this is where I think reenactments actually can serve a really useful function, and I'm sure a lot of them do.
Mm.
I went to one many, many years ago, the Revolutionary War in New England. That was great. Learned a lot, and didn't have any of this kind of propagandizing of history.
Right.
So I'm sure many of them are excellent. It's just the one day that I went to this one reenactment was not great. I hope it's not representative of reenactments.
Mm.
And I hope it's not representative of this reenactment. But yeah, so there was one of the last things I mentioned, as far as I was thinking about that article, the political article a lot, and the kind of people that were there.
Mm.
I wish I had more opportunity to talk to more of them. I suspect after my discourse with Nathan Bedford Forrest, there were probably a lot who were not interested in talking to me. But there was one of the few non-white people there was a young Latino man who was in the audience. He got up and left about 2/3 of the way through. Don't know why. So he had a red baseball cap on
Mm.
with white letters on it that I could see from the side. I thought, oh, I wonder if he's MAGA, if it says "Make America Great Again," because that's what they all look like, the red with the white letters. So when he got up and turned toward me and walked out, his hat said "a red hat with white letters." I thought, well, that's clever. I don't know how to interpret that as far as where he stands politically, but I like the unexpected
Mm.
there. So
That's cool.
I should probably get going. I got
Yeah, I was
like
gonna
two.
say
You've got an afternoon.
yep, you have a
Yeah,
photo shooting ahead of you.
yeah, yeah.
So, well, again, thank you so much, Scott. And I think before the talk, we kind of had a question that we might need to revisit later in the year for installment number
Yeah.
3, maybe.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That'd be great. All right.
All right, have
Right.
fun at the battlefield, and thank you so
Take some
much.
great
Yeah.
Take some great
Good talking
pictures.
with both of you. Yeah. Love it. All right. Have a good day.
You too.
All right. I stopped the recording minutes before you left.
Uh,
Yeah, we should definitely do a third one on the different commemoration styles.
yeah, I
We
was
have to
thinking
do a
about it
little
too.
more research and
Yeah, and I have to be in better. I've got to talk more. And I've got
well,
to
I
talk,
think that like I mean
be
he
more
did a
articulate.
15-20 minute monologue there because he kind of went through all the experiences, which is fine.
Yeah, which is great. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. He
Um,
went 20 minutes over, so that's also great.
yeah. Uh, he talked about, living history stuff at
Mm.
Revolutionary War sites. I went to one in Canada,
Mm.
2001, just
Oh,
south of
geez.
Windsor, called Fort Malden, and it was a War of 1812 fort.
Mm.
There was a battle there,
There were a
and they
lot of
had,
the Niagara frontier area.
yeah, well, no, on the other side near Detroit,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
across from Detroit on the Detroit
Hmm.
River, and yeah, so they had British living historians from British soldiers, which is
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Always nice to see some red coats. I can further tomorrow and see them actually. Don't ask. Don't ask. It's a pirate fest.
All right.
Like at least the Viking fest makes sense, but not the pirate fest. But Olaf is already ready to get dressed up as a pirate.
Well, pirates are fun.
Yeah, pillage, rape, plunder. It's great. Great lifestyle.
That's it. Yep. Yep. All right. I'm gonna go.
Oh,
My teeth hurt. I need to take a pill for the pain. Sucks. Went to the
uh,
dentist today. There's nothing to do. So
oh, ouch. That's not
yeah,
good. Maybe it's sinus.
no, because it's down here.
Oh, okay. No, then it's not.
So I have what do you call it? An X-ray,
Hmm.
some
Yeah, it's
kind of
an
special
X-ray too.
X-ray
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Fun times. You get to see what all your teeth look on the inside.
Well, I've had a couple of these before
Yeah.
because they wanted to check when my kidney function shot
Mm.
down, just
Uh,
dropped. All right,
I see.
it was fun
Yeah. So we are on next
for the
in
13th
week and a half,
week and a half, 2
2
weeks.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
Ben just emailed me, so check your calendar. Um, the day after we do Amy's, August 14 would work best for him.
Okay.
So check
I know
with.
we're having Adeline's mom that week.
Okay.
Um, so that might be a day when we do something together because
Okay.
I know that one of the days while I'm in dialysis, Monday, Wednesday, Friday,
Mm-hmm.
they're gonna go do something.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah.
And we have Amy is an early one too, so was that like 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock? Was an early one was her.
Yeah.
So just be mindful.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's a day where I'll see if I can only do 4 hours or 4.5 hours of dialysis instead of
Yeah,
5, so I can have time for a good nap.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, check your schedule, talk to Adeline, and
Yeah.
then we can confirm with Ben or not. I mean, we can do probably six or so, or seven even. Like make it later in the day. That way, it's maybe fits better if you're out for the day and come back early evening.
Yeah. Or we could even do it earlier in the day if it's a day that we're going to be in, like a
Yeah,
Tuesday or Thursday,
yeah,
if we're going to be here. So
yeah,
yeah, but
yeah, yeah,
we'll figure it out.
yeah. Just let me know and I can arrange it with him.
All right. Well, I'll talk to her and see what's going on.
Yeah, sounds like a plan.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
take care.
Yep, I
Nice
will.
seeing you.
Nice seeing you too. Actually, I was thinking like we're going down to Berlin for the passport thing with Olaf next week, but I was actually like briefly thinking Frankfurt. Oh, you guys could take the train from Poitiers, Paris, Frankfurt. So would those side of things work for you guys or
We have the dogs.
sure?
The dogs are a problem in that the kennel is full.
Oh, so you can't board them with anyone.
Right.
Well, we're not
And
like
the, and
not for
the people
now,
who
but for the
yeah
future.
for the future, yeah, of course. Um, yeah, because we had a friend house sit
Right.
when we were in Prague.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
we're going with a birthday party in Orléans at the beginning of September, and he's gonna house sit
Okay.
from Friday to Sunday.
Okay.
So, it's definitely doable.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So
And
that
I'd
would
like
be
to visit
something we
Frankfurt
can
as well.
that would be something we could plan as sort of if something is on the train line or something on.
Yeah,
Yeah. Perfect.
yeah, because you take the train out of Schleswig.
We probably would drive with a dog stout or something.
Okay,
Schleswig doesn't have that great like it literally the train to Prague was discontinued the week after we took it.
really?
Yeah,
For the season or forever?
forever. Yeah, they're they're shrinking. They were shrunk the route down from Flensburg to Prague to Berlin to Prague, and they intend to open Copenhagen to Prague. I think next summer. Um, but
Do
then
you speak
it
Danish?
no, no, I
Okay.
don't.
Do they all speak German, or do you speak English with them
What do you mean?
when you go to Denmark?
They
You go to
speak perfect
Legoland.
English. They perfect English.
Okay.
I
How far is Frankfurt from you in a car?
5 hours, 6 hours probably.
Yeah, because it's probably 8 hours from us.
Yeah, so it's probably
We can
about
also drive.
midway. Yeah, it's probably midway. Yeah,
We can meet up for a vacation
yeah, yeah,
during
exactly.
over vacation.
Yeah, we'll have to see because Steph wants and needs to go to the States, so we might do October, um, but
You're gonna
maybe
buy a handgun
spring.
when you get there?
I could. It's super
You could.
easy. You just go to a gun show and you don't need anything,
That's it.
and then commit a terror act.
Yeah.
Oh God.
All right.
All right,
Tell Steph we said hi.
will do. And good luck with your dental appointment tomorrow.
Thanks.
Have fun.
Talk to you later.
Bye.